A historic agreement reducing nuclear weapons, Reagan defended himself this way.
I realize some Americans may be asking tonight, why not accept Mr. Gorbachev's demand? Why not give up SDI for this agreement? Well, the answer, my friends, is simple. SDI is America's insurance policy that the Soviet Union would keep the commitments made at Reykjavik.
The president's speech was notable for its restraint in avoiding personal attacks on Gorbachev or on Soviet motives in Reykjavik, thus clearly leaving the way open for future talks. Reagan conceded that significant progress was made in the arms control negotiations at Reykjavik. But just as clearly, Reagan was not about to abandon Star Wars, and he avoided building up any expectations that a solution might be found soon.
I cannot promise, nor can any president promise, that the talks in Iceland or any future discussions with Mr. Gorbachev will lead inevitably to great breakthroughs or momentous treaty signings. We will not abandon the guiding principle we took to Reykjavik. We prefer no agreement than to bring home a bad agreement.
The battle over Star Wars now moves to Congress, where Democrats will no doubt try to derail it by cutting off funding. Reagan's political foes say he passed up the arms control bargain of the century.
I think that an awful lot of people are going to think that was a pretty good deal, and that the White House walked away from a really promising agreement.
The emperor is wearing no clothes. The president, who has said that he favors arms control and favors deep reduction in Soviet weapons, now is shown to be somebody that really supports an arms race.
The American president was clearly trying to avoid any deterioration of U.S.-Soviet relations coming out of Reykjavik. He even renewed his invitation to the Soviet leader to come to the U.S. and said, "We are ready to take up where we left off." Craig Oliver, CTV News in Washington.
Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev returned home today following the unsuccessful conclusion of the Iceland summit. Top officials of the Soviet Politburo were on hand to greet Gorbachev as he stepped off the plane in Moscow. The Soviet leader had nothing more to say about the summit. Instead, the only official comment came from the Soviet news agency TASS. The agency blamed Washington for the unsuccessful outcome of the meetings in Reykjavik. U.S. Secretary of State George Shultz was in Brussels today to brief NATO ministers about the talks in Iceland. Shultz told External Affairs Minister Joe Clark and other NATO officials that the U.S. will continue to work for an arms control agreement. Some NATO members said they were disappointed that the talks collapsed, but most were optimistic that a superpower agreement can still be reached. Philip Winslow reports.
The Europeans had had high hopes that the talks would yield progress, especially on the issue of intermediate-range missiles. After the talks in Reykjavik, American Secretary of State George Shultz flew to Brussels to brief NATO foreign ministers. Shultz was quick to make his point that the talks had not failed and to soothe the worried Europeans.
Reykjavik was a success. It would have been a failure not to try, and would be a failure not to follow up on the many achievements at Reykjavik.
The European ministers spoke with nearly one voice, saying they were discouraged and disappointed, but remained optimistic that the deadlock over the American Strategic Defense Initiative could be broken. The British government supported the American position on SDI and criticized those who suggested Reagan should have been more flexible.
What you're asking is a sort of one-way blank check, and that is something, as I say, nobody responsible should give them, and I'm very glad the president didn't.
The Soviets were careful not to gloat, but they wasted no time in starting to make political hay while the sun shines. On Tuesday morning, Soviet foreign ministry officials will meet with French President Mitterrand and with British Prime Minister Thatcher to try to convince Europe that the Soviet stance is reasonable. Philip Winslow for CTV News, London.
Another earthquake hit El Salvador today. This one registered 5 on the Richter scale. But authorities say there are no signs of new damage. Rescuers continued the search today for victims of Friday's devastating quake. Tom Clark reports.
Relief supplies have started to arrive in San Salvador, giving doctors more of the precious medicines they need to treat the injured. But at best, it is only making a small difference. Some estimates put the number of wounded well above 50,000, the number of homeless in the hundreds of thousands, and official death counts of about 1,000. But for now, these are nothing but informed guesses. What few officials or rescue teams have seen or dealt with is the damage in the barrios, the slums of the city. So complete is the devastation in some areas that people have been forced to move into the Bremeja Cemetery. It is in this cemetery that the poor of San Salvador bury their dead. And it is here where the tragedy of the barrios can be seen most clearly. These women and children said that they hadn't seen any official or relief worker since the earthquake hit. They have no food. This woman buried her 18-month-old child here yesterday. Today, she and her 4 remaining children live beside the grave. They have nothing. More are coming to Bremeja by the hour, both the living and the dead. Some burials are dignified by a simple casket, but most are put in a shallow grave, 4 or 5 bodies to each. Manuel Riaz buried his wife and 2 children today, their grave marked only by a branch. Like all who live in the barrios, Mr. Riaz had to search for his family himself, without the help of any international aid. In the official government version of this tragedy, the poor of San Salvador, both the living and the dead, are not so much statistics as they are just victims, officially numberless, and in many cases, nameless. Tom Clark, CTV News, San Salvador.
Japanese scientists say a strong earthquake rocked the east coast of Japan tonight. The quake was centered 180 kilometers north of Tokyo. It registered 5.7 on the Richter scale. Police have no immediate reports of damage or casualties. Cargoes of food and medicine have been flown to famine-stricken southern Sudan, the first flights in 2 months. 4 plane loads have arrived over the past 2 days. Relief shipments had been blocked by the country's civil war, but the government has assured relief agencies that planes can now land safely in stricken areas. After 5.5 months, Expo 86 closed its doors in Vancouver today. Critics had said earlier the exposition was a waste of money, but after drawing huge crowds all summer long, BC Premier Bill Vander Zalm tonight called it the most popular World Fair ever held. More from Henry Kowalski.
Closing day, special but sad. Andrea Cabin even put on the earrings she saves for occasions.
The party's over. It's sad. It's always sad when the party's over.
The sadness is understandable because people really love this fair, so much so that over 22 million of them came to see it. Only 13 million were expected. Numbers tell a story of success, a site so clean they wore out 1,500 brooms, pavilions so memorable that one restaurant alone had 6,000 ashtrays taken as souvenirs. And the financial figures were good too.
$4 billion in economic activity in British Columbia alone.
The BC and the federal government will get in excess of $600 to $700 million in taxes.
It is obviously up to others to make use of the momentum created by the exposition.
But there are worries that unemployment will go up after Expo and that the fair won't deliver the tourism and industry it was meant to. Those thoughts are for other days. For now, there was just enough time for one last lineup and a special closing day stamp. And then the pavilions closed. 60,000 people jammed BC Place Stadium for the finale. One last chance to see the sights and sounds of Expo and to see the world together. In a surprise move, the USA and Soviet Union walked in together. It was a celebration of BC's arrival on the world stage. After 2 disastrous world fairs in the United States, Vancouver showed that a world fair can work.
Some said it shouldn't be done. It couldn't be done, but we did it.
They handed the Expo flag to Australia, and a lone piper played Old Lang Syne from the base of the large Canadian flag on the site. The crowd joined in. And then it was over. Henry Kowalski, CTV News, Vancouver.
Now, you can shave closer and smoother all over, face, neck, and sideburn. Because Braun has created the totally new System 1, 2, 3. It adjusts 3 ways.
1.
So now you can shave
2.
closer and smoother
3.
all over. Redesigned for extra smoothness, the foil is now pearl finished and platinum coated. The revolutionary Braun System 1, 2, 3 shaves closer and smoother all over for your money back.
We're asking Canadians why they're choosing new fiberglass pink home insulation.
Firstly, we saved enough to help us buy this lovely, lovely new swimming pool, which we can also share with a few of our closest friends. Secondly, because pink passes the test.
We've invited the Bonards friends to help demonstrate that test. That the best insulation can bounce back for maximum savings. New fiberglass pink. Do it for the money you save.
What you're about to see is a magnificent collection of German-engineered road sedans. Stop us when we get to one you can afford. The Mercedes-Benz 190E, the Audi 4000S, the BMW 325e, the Volkswagen Jetta. It's curious how many people stop us at this point. The Volkswagen Jetta, the affordable German-engineered road sedan.
Turn on the juice, let it flow. Turn on the juice, let it go. Florida seal of approval says it's made naturally. Turn it on, all you want is take a taste and you'll see. Turn it on, turn on the juice, turn on the juice.
Concentrated orange juice with Florida's seal of approval. No matter where the oranges were grown, it's made to standards higher than the U.S. government's. Look for the Florida seal on these quality brands, for goodness sake.
There was both elaborate ceremony and some casual sightseeing in Peking today for the Queen. It was the first full day in the Chinese capital for Queen Elizabeth, who was on a 6-day state visit. More from Roger Smith.
There was a 21-gun salute in Tiananmen Square, and the band played God Save the Queen. The Chinese word for queen is female king, but the official welcome was fit for any monarch. There were the usual troops to review, and children. And it was the children who most charmed the Queen and the communist president. Not all the Union Jacks in the square were flown right side up, but that was about the only hitch. President Li Xinyan later told the Queen her visit is a glorious chapter in Chinese-British relations. Chinese security was tighter than usual. There were even checks on journalists covering the visit. First stop on the Queen's sightseeing itinerary was the Forbidden City. It's the former palace of emperors, the old Chinese equivalent of Buckingham Palace. The first British envoys to China 400 years ago were snubbed by the emperor as inferior barbarians. But not this Queen. Visiting peasants rushed to get a look. Tourism may be her main goal, but British business hopes to ride the Queen's coattails. As the Queen spends 2 days seeing the sights around Peking, British businessmen will be wining and dining their Chinese counterparts aboard the Royal Yacht in Shanghai. That's a nice bit of one-upmanship in the tough fight to do business in China. As she left the Forbidden City, the Chinese were still curious about one thing: how a queen dresses to look like a queen. They found out at an evening banquet, when the Queen fulfilled Chinese expectations with long gown and tiara. In her speech, she praised China's modernization and the deal 2 years ago to return Hong Kong to China.
Both our countries are committed to doing everything possible to maintain Hong Kong's continued stability and prosperity.
Roger Smith, CTV News, Peking.
Prime Minister Edward Seaga of Jamaica has said he does not intend to seek re-election. Seaga told party officials yesterday he would not seek the party's leadership at a convention next month and that he will step down as Prime Minister in August of 1987. But today, officials of his Labour Party were discussing ways to persuade him to change his mind. International oil prices have begun to tumble again following a squabble among OPEC oil producers. OPEC members are meeting in Geneva trying to work out a new pricing agreement. But today, Saudi Arabia said the latest proposals from other countries will not give it a big enough share of the market, and the Saudis say they won't sign any new deal. The 1986 Nobel Prize for Medicine was announced today, and it will be shared by two researchers for their discovery 30 years ago of key proteins that regulate human cell growth. The $400,000 prize was awarded jointly to Italian-American biologist Rita Levi-Montalcini and American biochemist Stanley Cohen. Levi-Montalcini is now a researcher at the Laboratory of Cell Biology in Rome. She will donate her prize to young scientists. Her former co-worker, biochemist Stanley Cohen of Vanderbilt University, said he lucked out when he made the discoveries. He said he was looking for something else.
This is CN Today. Running a railway so efficiently that we can track each rail car by the minute and carry information far beyond the reach of railway lines. To serve this land today and in the future, we must work this harder way with lean, compact efficiency, working the CN way into tomorrow's world.
The Bay salutes Canadians out working for us all.
The Bay salutes Canada with savings on Canadian products. Here's an exclusive offer during the Ladies' Shoe Spectacular. Save 25% on Canadian-made, all-leather dress shoes by Jeunesse. 5 great styles, now just $32.99 a pair. Yes, the Bay wants you to think Canadian.
Nothing beats homemade, and nothing beats the Bay.
How do you improve a nasal spray?
I like a spray because it's fast. It helps me breathe better right away. Now, if you could only make it work longer, that would be something.
So we did. Long-lasting nasal mist by Dristan lasts 3 times longer than our regular spray.
Great. It's fast, and now one lasts me all night.
Long-lasting nasal mist by Dristan lasts 3 times longer.
I hate to drive in the rain. Really? That's when I trust my Michelins the most. Michelins? Do you think they're worth it? Even when the weather's fine, I'm glad I got Michelin tires. I'd rather save the money. They're really not that expensive. Besides, Louise, is that the most important thing in your life? Could we take your car to pick up the kids? I insist.
Michelin, because so much is riding on your tires.
It is Thanksgiving, a time to give thanks for the harvest. In Nova Scotia today, they completed the harvest in the pumpkin patch. The World Pumpkin Association isn't the only group looking for the best pumpkin, but it is one of the better known. And this year, the man credited with putting the sport on the map had to settle for second best. Fiona Conway reports.
Howard Dill is the king of the pumpkin patch. After all, he developed the strain of pumpkin seed that has a reputation of growing the biggest pumpkins in the world. But Nova Scotia had a bad summer, and Howard knew his pumpkins wouldn't be winners this year.
It's been a tough year in the pumpkin patch here in Nova Scotia, that's for sure.
But there's some consolation for this former world champion. Stan Riggs won the Nova Scotia title with his 394-pound entry. It was a Howard Dill seed.
Yeah, it's from one of his babies from last year, the seeds.
Then it was time for the World Pumpkin Confederation's weigh-off. The meeting was convened by telephone with callers from around the world.
Lynn Collinson was the winner at 188 pounds.
The Europeans haven't refined their techniques, but the Americans, with a better growing season, cleaned up. New Jersey topped the list at 671 pounds at a weigh-in in New York State. And again, Howard Dill, whose seed is sold around the world, had reason to be happy.
And there's no doubt in my mind, particularly the grower that won today, the championship, that he had my seeds for the past 3 years.
While growers dreamed of what could come next Thanksgiving, children dreamed of Halloween.
Big pumpkin pies if you cut them up.
What else do you do with them?
You make big jack-o'-lanterns with them.
Fiona Conway, CTV News, Windsor.
Tomorrow on Canada AM, more reaction to U.S. President Ronald Reagan's speech to the nation. Lloyd Robertson is on assignment in Vancouver. He will be back here Wednesday. I will see you here tomorrow night. I'm Sandy Ronaldo for CTV News. Thank you for joining us. Good night.
This is the CTV Television Network.